Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oak Show. Hope you're doing well while the rest of the world is burning to the ground because of the coronavirus. We've got a good show for you today, and you should have some extra time to watch it. So hopefully you're doing okay. I know there's a lot of serious stuff going on in the world, but we're doing our best to communicate hope and truth and give some direction. And excited about our show today, and I hope that you will take away a lot of great things from it. Before we get into it though, if you have not yet, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, hit that notification bell. That lets you know when new stuff comes online, and we're always producing content. We'd love to get more of that out to you and let you know when that comes online, and hitting that notification bell is the best way for you to keep in touch with us. Go ahead and comment if you have comments, and we'd love to share all of these things with you, and very excited about my guest today. Our guest today is Dusty Shelhamer. Dusty, we have been trying to get on the show for like 3 years or something, I don't know. We've scheduled and rescheduled and then adjusted, and finally Dusty's on lockdown in his home office in Texas. So we thought this would be a good time to talk, but super stoked to have Dusty with us. Dusty is a personal friend, someone I consider a strong friend, a true friend, and I'm thankful for him. But his testimony and his story is great. And today we're going to talk about Dusty, about his story, and really talk about the life of a first responder. Dusty has been involved in the first responder world for many, many years as a firefighter, as a paramedic, as a police officer, also has worked with the Department of Homeland Security, was part of the rescue efforts at Ground Zero following 9/11, also in Oklahoma City and in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So a lot of big events that he's been a part of, and has also come through Mighty Oaks. So excited to talk to him. Dusty, thanks for taking some time out of your schedule to hang out with us today.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me on. The schedule's pretty open right now. The whole world being on lockdown, we're all working remotely. So
Right.
It kind of worked out today that I was able to be around.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
No, it's awesome. I'm glad the time worked out, and we just spent a couple days together this last weekend in Texas, which was really cool. Trying to hunt a little bit, didn't get a lot, but got a little bit, so that was fun. And yeah, it's always good to hang out. Dusty, you've been involved in just about every aspect, I think, of the first responder world. Talk to us a little bit about that. Maybe tell us about where you grew up and how you got involved in really a lifetime of service and helping folks.
Well, I grew up in a small town in central West Texas, if there is such a thing. It's called Brownfield, Texas. It's just outside of Lubbock. Grew up in a farming and oil field community, and just had a normal life. I mean, I had a decent life. Mom and Dad were good to us. We didn't have everything we wanted, but we always had everything we needed.
Yeah.
And being a small town like that, it was pretty easy to be a leader in everything that you did. So I was captain of the basketball team. I was president of the FFA. Just stayed involved and active, and kind of always seemed to have a leadership role. And that kind of played out into my adulthood, because when I went off to college, I decided I wanted to be a police officer, and went in and got my associate's degree in criminal justice, and broke out to be a police officer, and got out there. And even back in the late 80s, early 90s, I found out that police weren't well respected. So every time I'd go on a police call, I'd see the firemen show up, and everybody loved the firemen and hated to see the cops. So I thought, man, maybe that's where I need to be. So I shifted over into the fire service and started a career in firefighting and rescue. And our department that I went to work for had a division that you could be a police officer, a firefighter, and a paramedic. Yeah. So that kind of fit well with the department that I wanted to be in. So I already had the police training, so it was easy for them to slide me into that position. So they didn't have to train me to be a police officer already. They had already trained me to be a firefighter and a paramedic. So I slid into that position, and being a new program and me already having it, I immediately kind of went to the top of that program. So as that rolled along, we started a little rescue team. We wanted to try to get a rescue team together and serve the state of Texas. And we were all pretty young, and we wanted to develop this team to basically be a rapid response SWAT team for the state of Texas. And we got it up and running, and as soon as we got it up and running, Oklahoma City bombing happened, and we deployed out to Oklahoma City bombing. And the tragedy that was, everything went well from what we were trying to do. They saw a need in us. They saw that they could use us. And the federal government started to say, hey, we want to do this nationwide. So we started the program, the National DMATS, Disaster Medical Assistance Teams. And we would just start traveling around to major disasters and help out where needed every time it overloaded the natural system. That eventually consumed me and took over my life, basically, because they just started deploying us more and more and more. So, we started doing all the major disasters, Del Rio floods, and Oklahoma City bombing, like I said, Houston floods. They had Tropical Storm Allison that came in and flooded Houston in 2000, and that kind of skyrocketed my career. I don't know, there's a series of unfortunate events, or just they always say there's no coincidences with God. I don't know, but I was at Tropical Storm Allison, and my commander couldn't make a meeting, so she sent me to a meeting and said, hey, you need to go to this meeting. I can't make it. So I went downtown to a emergency management coordinators meeting and walked into the wrong meeting. And when I walked in, sat down, thought I knew what I was doing, I'd actually walked into the management support team meeting for the initial operation. And me being the way I am, it didn't take me long to proceed to tell them I thought they were doing it wrong. Kind of upset a few people, but there was one guy in there that after the meeting pulled me aside and he goes, hey man, I kind of like what you're doing. We want you to join the management support team.
Wow.
So that skyrocketed my career into that. Having said all that, it pretty much just, I guess God put me where he needed me to be, but I kind of bypassed a lot of steps and always made my way to the top of the ladder. And so when I got in that management support team and started rolling with those guys, I just started going to every event. We would do the disasters, but we would also do the non-disasters. I've done standby for a lot of State of the Union addresses. We've done Olympics. We've done G8 summits down in Georgia. So I had a lot of good things that went along. And then kind of seemed like after 9/11, the career kind of started taking a dark side. And the tragedies kind of just started to build up and mount, after spending all the time at World Trade Center. Then, you had the space shuttle disaster right behind that. Then we had Hurricane Katrina on top of that. Everything just kind of started to pile up on me, and didn't really notice it. I guess PTSD wasn't a term back in the days. We would talk about it at Ground Zero. They kind of hinted around to it. We would have to meet with a psychologist every morning. We worked 12-hour shifts. We'd have to meet with a psychologist in the mornings, go work our shift, come back out, meet with the psychologist afterwards. And that was our daily routine. We'd spend 10 hours on and an hour on each side, front and back, with the psychologist. Well, 587 happened, which was a plane crash that happened in Queens, and we rolled out to it and spent the day at 587 helping recover that tragedy. That was American Airlines flight at 587 that crashed in Queens about a month, and I guess it was November after 9/11. So it was still fresh. Everybody was scared it was another terrorist attack. We worked that, came back to see our psychologist, was talking to him, and everything was going pretty good. And that kind of started to develop the trend of, hey, these guys are going through a lot and seeing a lot. So it never really bothered me that much at the time because I was still young and gung-ho, and I would go from one deployment to something else and just packing all these tragedies down on top of each other. And when you're working on the next one, you forgot about the last one, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And all of that rocked along through my career. Cost me my first marriage. My first wife wanted me to quit, and I wouldn't quit. I told her, it's kind of great. Me and her got a great relationship now. She's a sweetheart. We get along fantastic. We've got a 16-year-old autistic son together, and so we still get along wonderful. But she told me that the day she knew that our marriage was over is I had came back for a few days during the middle of 9/11, And they would send us home for a couple of days every once in a while to kind of repack, reorganize, get some stuff together, and then deploy you back out. Well, I was sitting at home with her, and we were sitting in the hot tub together one night, and I just broke down and started crying in the hot tub, which was insane for me at the time. I mean, it was just, even I was mad at myself for that. I didn't know what was going on. Well, she asked me, she said, why don't you quit doing this? And I looked her dead in the eye and I told her, I said, I'm already messed up. There's no sense in somebody else having to go through what I've gone through. And she was like, okay, I get it. And at that point, she knew that our marriage was over. She tried to hold it together for a while, rocked along. I just wouldn't quit deploying. I would just stay gone all the time. So we finally decided it was time to divorce, and we did. Not something I'm super proud of, but it's just the way it happened. We still get along great and fantastic. Well, I rocked along through there and got through all the deployments and put my 20 years in and decided it was time to get out. I had a real good friend that reached out to me and said, hey, you've got your 20, let's retire. He works in the oil field and said, let's go make some money. So I got out and went into the private sector and became an oil field safety, which at the time was great, man. I doubled my salary and things were rocking along. I had re-met my current wife at the time, and we were getting our relationship going, but things started going bad, and I didn't really understand what was going on. All that tragedy just kind of started coming back out, and I didn't understand it, but I was very mean to her. I never was abusive, but I was very cold and callous to her and just didn't care. If I did something to make her mad, she'd get mad. And instead of me trying to correct it, I'd just say, oh, well, get over it and move on. And that's not healthy for any relationship, believe it or not.
Right.
Contrary to what people think.
Right.
And so anyway, as that rocked on, I started pushing her away. We'd gotten married and I'd pushed her out and divorced. And then a really good friend of mine, I had been working with the Mighty Oaks. I'm going to back up a second. I had been working with the Mighty Oaks a little bit down at the Blaylock Ranch when Chad was getting it going and getting it rolling. He would bring the guys down to the Blaylock Ranch, and was nowhere near the setup we have down there right now. But we had the river and a bunch of kayaking, and we had some cliffs and climbing walls, and we would set up adventure courses for these guys. And believe it or not, at the time we would take them hunting. We'd have hunting trips. And so Chad and Jeff Blaylock were good friends, and I think they served together in Marine Recon. So that's kind of how I got tied to Chad. Was Jeff would invite me down because they would need some help, need a medic down there when they were doing this kind of stuff. So I'd go down and be a medic and help out. And some of those guys would have some issues that, good thing, that I'd be there, we'd work on and help them get through. Well, as my life started to deteriorate, Jeff reached out to Chad and said, hey, have you checked on Dusty lately? And Chad's like, no, what's going on with Dusty?
Yeah.
And I don't know. So one day out of the blue, I get a phone call from Chad Robichaux, and he said, hey, man, how's everything going? I'm typical. I can't say I'm the typical veteran because I never was a veteran and never have served, but I'm the typical alpha male. Like, nothing's wrong. I'm fine. Everything's good. He's like, no, man, something's going on. I hear things aren't going too good. I don't know what you've been hearing, but everything's fine. I'm okay. So we started, Chad has a way of kind of getting in you, whether it's he irritates you enough that you finally break down and tell him what he wants to hear, or he just crawls in there. I don't know. But he finally got it out of me that, things were kind of going bad, and he invited me out to the program. And at the time, there hadn't been any civilians go through the program. It had all been veterans. And I believe that there may have been a couple of first responders that had gone through, but they went through as veterans. The first responder side really hasn't been recognized yet.
Right.
So Chad kept telling me to come out, and I'm pretty pro-veteran and pro-military, but I was denying. I was like, no, man, that's for veterans. You need to save that for those guys. Those guys need it. I don't need it. Typical answer that you hear from everybody else. Those guys need help. I don't need help.
Right.
That's pretty common. So finally he convinced me to come out, and man, I went out there to Skyrose, and you talk about a fish out of water. I did not feel like I fit in day one. People who have gone through Mighty Oaks understand this, but people who have never been probably won't. But man, the very first day when everybody's kind of coming in and coming together, there's this, what I call the dog sniffing day where everybody's kind of
Right.
sniffing around at each other, trying to size each other up and
Right.
trying to figure out who's who and who's what. And, you know, you're still in that macho tough mode and you're trying to figure out who's tougher, who's the bad guy here, you know. And so I'm kind of way out of place here because I got all these military veterans around and here I am just me. So it really struck me how the program started out and kind of hit me pretty hard. And it wasn't after the first day I didn't feel really out of place anymore. I kind of felt like, all right, we all have something in common. Whatever it is, we all have a different story, but we all have something in common. So I had grown up in a Christian home, grew up not going to church every day, not going, you know, we were what I would call holiday churchgoers. We'd go on Easter Sunday and Christmas and that kind of stuff, but we weren't solid churchgoers. But I had a good faith in God. I just wasn't a good follower of God. And there's a big difference there, which I came to learn. So anyway, we're rocking along, going through there. And, you know, Mighty Oaks kind of slowly started digging into me. And Jeremy's one of the success stories of me right there, because at the time, I didn't know Jeremy. Jeremy didn't know me, but just kind of like sometimes a preacher does when you go to church on Sunday, you feel like they're speaking directly at you and they're not talking to anybody else in the room. So some of the things he was saying was going right straight at me. We went out on September 9th. We went down to a jiu-jitsu gym. And at the time we were going down and training jiu-jitsu, and Chad was showing us jiu-jitsu and trying to give us an outlet, a stress outlet and things. And so we went down to jiu-jitsu on Wednesday, I guess. Yeah, Wednesday, September 9th, we went down to jiu-jitsu. And that kind of struck with me good. It was like, you know, this is pretty neat. I'd never even heard the word jiu-jitsu. And we'll get into that story here in a minute. So we come back that night and we're all sitting on the back porch of Skyrose, and Jeremy had kind of gathered us up on the back porch, and we're sitting around they have this little fire pit out there, and we're all sitting around the fire pit. And I was sitting in a corner chair and was sitting back there, and Jeremy's talking and carrying on and really speaking to us. And he just stopped and he said, "Hey, is anybody getting anything out of this? Is anything happening right now?" And it just hit me. I was like, man, it just, you know, they always say that just God comes into your heart. And he did at that moment. He just came right into my heart. And I raised my hand and I said, yeah. I said, I really feel like I want to be closer to God. So I stood up, walked over, and there's a little side area there. And Jeremy and Chad kind of took me off to the side over there, and we talked. And I had asked God to come back into my life that night. When I was younger, I went to church camp. I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, I went to church camp in Brownwood, Texas. And I asked God to come in my heart then. And I don't know that you kind of wonder if it's real back then or not, if you're just doing it because everybody at church camp's doing it or whatever. But at 44 years old, I knew exactly what it meant. And so that night I had, I tell everybody I found God in jiu-jitsu on the same day. So it's kind of a neat program there, because that's kind of what's carried me on through the rest of my adulthood. So we walk around through there, and on September 11th, Jeremy baptized me there at Skyrose Ranch.
Yeah.
So, which kind of changed my life in the sense of the way I think about 9/11. 9/11 had been a terrible day for me. It had been awful. And every time 9/11 would roll around, I'm not a drinker. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't ever had a drug problem. I've been pretty fortunate with that. But on 9/11, I would go off and isolate myself and sit at a sports bar and drink. And then a couple of times that Jeff would just have to come pick me up and leave my truck and drive me home. And it would just be the one night that I would just twist off. Very fortunate that there was no ill effects of that. But, you know, other than that, I could go the rest of the year and not have a drink. But anyway, so 9/11 was a deep, dark time for me. And now I'm able to look back at 9/11. 9/11 is my birthday. I got baptized by Jeremy there. So that started my road to recovery, and recovery that I didn't even know I needed. I didn't really know I was in a bad spot until I turned around and started looking around me. Well, testimony night there at Mighty Oaks, we do testimonies, and so we're all sitting around trying to get up the courage to get up there and tell our story. And I still kind of feel like I don't necessarily fit in. Got all these veterans, war veterans, getting up there, and they're telling some great stories, and great's a bad term, I guess, to say, but they're telling some stories that are pretty impressive. They've been in some dark places and had some dark times in their life. And I'm sitting there trying to think, man, I had a great childhood. A lot of these guys had crappy childhoods. I had a great childhood. My problems didn't really start till adulthood. Well, these guys had crappy childhoods, and then they had problems through adulthood, and then they had to go through war, and then they had to go through all these other issues. So I'm not really having the courage to tell my story. And it's voluntary. When you get up there on testimony night, it's voluntary. And they say, we ask that you tell your story, but you don't have to. Well, Chris Carlisle, God bless his soul, I'll never forget him. He's sitting there asking, telling everybody in his knife hand way, who's next, who's next, who's next? Well, then all of a sudden he just goes, Shelhamer, you're next. And man, it caught me off guard because I thought this was voluntary.
It's voluntold. You're voluntold.
So me being from a paramilitary organization, I just received a direct order. I got up and went and sat in the chair and spilled my guts. And as I'm telling my story, I'm struggling to get through it and really hadn't really told it to anybody. And as I'm breaking down, I look out there and see these war heroes, what I consider class act war heroes, are breaking down and crying with me. And it was really kind of a movement moment to me to realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe it's normal for me to feel this way. And maybe it is. So one of the good things that came out of my testimony night is some of the leadership of Mighty Oaks at the time took a step back and realized that, hey, we're missing a whole group of people here. The first responders need our attention as well. They already knew the progress they were making with military veterans and their wives and their families, but they were like, man, we need to do something for our first responders. And so that was a very positive thing that night. Well, after my testimony, they asked me to present my story at the community graduation. Part of one, it was a pretty unique story, and two, it was on 9/11 that we were doing our graduation ceremony, and I had served at 9/11, so it was pretty good story for the community here as well. So I was kind of paraded up for one, I had a good story, and two, it was very fitting for the day.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a friend. I'd made a friend there at Mighty Oaks, and he was a current Navy SEAL. Name's Jonathan. Jonathan and me kind of hung out that week. We kind of got to know each other, and we're riding in the van together down to the community hall to get ready for graduation. As soon as we pull in the parking lot, I look over at Jonathan, and I say, Jonathan, my ex-wife's here. And he goes, how do you know? And I said, she's sitting in the back parking lot in her car, or in a rental car. I said, that's her. He goes, are you sure? And I said, I'm pretty sure that's her. And he's like, well, let's just go inside. So I'd already called Mara and told her that I'd been saved. And even though we were divorced and apart, she was ecstatic that I got saved. She's been a good Christian woman her entire life. And she just was through the roof happy that I had finally asked God to come into my heart for real. So anyway, we go into the community center, and as we're in the community center, we're walking around and kind of talking, meeting with the public in general, just kind of shaking everybody's hand and talking to them. And this lady walks up to me with a sack and a bag, and she said, are you Dusty Shelhamer? And I'm like, yeah. How does she know me? And she hands me this sack, and she says, Mara asked me to give you this. Okay. So I open it up, and inside this bag was a Bible. And she had given me this Bible. And there was also a necklace that I wore that she had made for me of one of the first elk that I had killed. Elk have ivory, and she made a necklace out of it. And I had taken it off and quit wearing it when we got divorced, but she had gave it back to me. So when I saw the bag and the necklace, I knew she was there, which my thoughts were that she was there in the parking lot. And I look over and I see her standing there. So I go over and I give her the biggest hug, and I say, thanks for coming. She flew out from Texas on her own dime to see me graduate from this program. Well, anyway, I give her the biggest hug, and I said, "Oh, thanks for coming. I'm glad you're here." And she stopped me in my tracks. She goes, "I didn't come here for you." And I was kind of like, "What?" She goes, "I came here for God."
Mm.
She goes, "I've been asking for 8 years for God to come into your heart, and now that He did, I owed it to Him to be here."
Mm.
So that was kind of like, whoa. It was kind of a kick in the teeth, but it was kind of mind blowing at the time too. It's like, wow. So anyway, I get up and I do my speech with the community and talk to the community and tell a toned down version of my story to the community, and things go well. And we return home, and Mara's living in Weatherford, Texas at the time, 3 hours away from where I live. And we start trying to rebuild our relationship. And she had a lot of trust issues, which she rightfully deserved to have. So we started working through those. And it's kind of funny. Me and her are both outdoors people. And we were trying to figure out how we could get together and talk, but neither one of us wanted to. We really didn't feel like we belonged in a romantic setting at the time. We needed to get some things ironed out, but it didn't need to be. So I have a bow fishing boat. So I hooked onto the bow fishing boat. This is about as redneck as it gets, so bear with me. I hooked onto the bow fishing boat, and I drove to Weatherford and picked her up at about 8:30 at night. We went and got some dinner, went down to Lake Worth in Fort Worth, Texas, and put the boat in the water. And if you know anything about bow fishing, you drive around real slow and you putt around with the spotlights on, and you see carp and fish swimming, and you shoot them with a bow. And we drove around till like 3 a.m. shooting carp and getting things straightened out.
Mm.
And it was a great place to talk. It was a great neutral. There wasn't any expectations or anything. So we slowly started to get our life worked back out. Well, she moved back home, and we got remarried, and we've been making a go at it ever since.
Yeah.
So things have been going great. So it's kind of a success story. Going back to jiu-jitsu, we're going to backtrack and side swap there. Chad had told me when I got home to find a jiu-jitsu gym. He goes, "Man, you're pretty good at this. You did okay. Go find a jiu-jitsu gym when you get home, but call me when you get there, because I want to make sure that it's not some crackpot gym and some fly-by-night gym in a mall or something." So I go back to Midland and find a place called Bastos Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I call Chad. I say, "Hey, I found this place in Midland called Bastos Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu." And Chad goes, Is that Bruno Bastos? And I said, "I don't know. I'm in the parking lot." And he says, "Just give me a second. I'll call you back." A few minutes later, he calls me and says, "Hey, that's Bruno Bastos' gym. Go sign up." Okay, so I walk into Bastos Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's one of the co-owners of the gym is Bradley Barnes, who's a Mighty Oaks alumni now. I walk in, I say, "Hey, I want to sign up for jiu-jitsu." And he's like, "Okay, great. We have a 2-week free trial, and just come on Monday night at 6 and you can try the beginner's class." I'm like, "No, I need to sign up." He's like, "No, you got 2 weeks free. Just come and see if you like it." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Here's my card. I need to sign up right now." And Brad's kind of like, "Okay, and I'll take your money." He took my money and signed me up. Well, I started in jiu-jitsu. The day I got home, I went and signed up for my first class, and Bruno and me just hit it off really well. Bruno's a great guy. Been an incredible coach after all of this, not only through jiu-jitsu. He's quick to get on me and tell me when I'm not doing the right thing anyway. But anyway, we go through there, and since I've started training with Bruno, I've won a Pan American Championship. Yep. I've won a Master World Championship. And just this past year in Anaheim, in December 14th, I won my No-Gi World Championship. Yep. So I've got 2 World Championships and a Pan American Championship with Bruno since starting Mighty Oaks. Since Mighty Oaks got me into
And you won your first gold medal within like 6 months of starting training, right?
Yeah, I won Pan Americans within 6 months of starting to train.
Incredible.
So it's been pretty incredible.
Crazy. Man, there's so much we could talk about here. What are some of the unique challenges for first responders and you've had the opportunity now to get some perspective between veterans and some of the things veterans deal with and the first responder community. And this is something, as you mentioned, we've learned as an organization. We now have dedicated programs for first responders, which you're involved in, and continuing to do our best to grow that out. First responders now are part of every session. You were the first one, kind of our test case. But since you came through, now we have first responders that are part of every session, mixed with our veterans. What are some of the unique challenges that first responders face? Because a lot of folks that I've talked to, a lot of men and women that I've talked to in that space, they say what you said. They say, well, I'm not a veteran, I didn't do that, so this doesn't apply to me. But our first responders are piling stuff on top of themselves for a lifetime. Can you talk about those challenges and some of the stuff that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think you just touched on the biggest thing right there is you get a first responder and he's got 20 years of dealing with tragedy. It's just one after another, and it's not just in our veterans, and I'm speaking totally off the hip here because I'm not a veteran, but they go into a military combat and they deal with a bad situation on a 1-year deployment and a 4-year career. We've got the majority of our veterans have 4 to 8 year careers, and they deal with, maybe 5 or 6 deployments in those 8 years. If it's a 4-year guy, he may have 2, maybe 3 deployments in those 4 years, where a first responder is dealing with this kind of stuff for 20, 25 years. And a lot of the things that the veterans or the first responders deal with is it usually doesn't come out until after they retire, because they pack on yesterday's stuff's behind them because you've got to deal with today's stuff today. And they just keep piling that stuff in. And then when it finally comes out, it just unloads at once. It just unloads. And then you got, there's a high suicide rate in police officers. And I think it's because of that. There's a high alcoholism rate in police officers. There's a high cancer rate in firefighters, and there's a high divorce rate in firefighters. And I think all of that has to do with them not knowing how to unpack that trash that they've packed in for so long. Yeah. So I think that's probably the difference, is the longevity of the tragedy is probably the biggest difference. The level of tragedy is probably equal. There's so much packed into 4 years of a veteran, and it's kind of just a whole big pile dumped on them and packed real tight real quick, to where first responders have it spread out through 20 years and it's packed. It's just a long, slow buildup.
I think we're doing a better job in the military space and the veteran space of kind of destigmatizing the idea of getting help and reaching out to people and trying to find, whether it's a VA program or some other program like Mighty Oaks for Help. Do you think there's a stigma against getting help in the first responders community?
Absolutely. There's a big stigma, especially in the law enforcement community. It's bigger than the firefighting community. Right now, I'm working with a church group here in Midland. Stonegate and Redeemer, the church I go to, Redeemer and Stonegate, have really come together to work on a veteran and first responder help in our community. And they've tied Mighty Oaks into this. And matter of fact, Stonegate developed an entire annual budget this year dedicated to Mighty Oaks. So that's going to be a good thing. But we have the leadership from the area fire departments and area law enforcement in our staff meetings. Yeah. And the biggest thing that the police are saying is the law enforcement guys don't want to say they have a problem, because it's very quick to take them off the front line and give them a desk job. If they think you're having any mental instability whatsoever, they'll pull your gun away from you and stick you behind a desk. And that's a big blow to those guys. So there's a lot of people that don't want to admit they need help because they don't want it to jeopardize their career, and it has the potential of doing so. We've
been working in this space very intentionally about reaching out to folks like that. And one of the things that I think makes a non-clinical program like Mighty Oaks, whether it's faith-based or there are other programs as well, but a non-clinical program like Mighty Oaks, helpful for those in the law enforcement, first responder community, as well as in the veteran community, is since it's non-clinical, it does not have to impact their ability to do their job when they go home. So they can attend a program like ours and get help, go through the process that you described in your life, and kind of go back to work. And it's not something that hits their books. It's not something that requires medication and those kind of things. So we've seen some help with that, and I think that's part of what we try to do, through this platform and others is let folks know there is help available that does not have to impact your job if you don't want to, if you don't want it to. You can find help, and you need to find help.
That's kind of the sneaky way that we've done our situation here in Midland is we've invited the police chief in, and we've invited the fire chief in, and we've invited those guys in. So we figure if we start at the top and we show them that it's okay to deal with these issues, that it's not a mental instability issue. And so having those guys on our board is incredibly helpful, that they understand these guys need some help, but that doesn't really mean they're unstable.
Right.
And another thing that we're finding out in the first responder community is typical fashion. It's not even in the male side of it. We got female first responders that are dealing with, but we have their spouse. We've invited their spouses to these meetings because sometimes the first responder himself or herself won't come, but the spouse will show up.
Yeah. And
the spouse is like, yeah, they have a problem.
Right.
And to where the first responder's like, no, I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
I was guilty of it myself. I was like, no, I don't have a problem. Somebody's telling you wrong. But we've kind of tried to pull the spouses in. So we're trying to kind of educate the spouses. So maybe they can go home and break that ice with their significant other and get them at least to engage.
I think, and this is, again, an area that we've done our best to continue to expand and understand in our programs. So we kind of have categories for folks who can attend our programs. We have veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and then the last category would be the spouses of any one of those categories. Because we've recognized, and we continue to learn this, that often the spouse, they don't just recognize that their husband or wife needs help, but they need help because they've dealt with, a career of this as well. And you mentioned it briefly, but can you talk a little bit more about that? I think we sometimes overlook the spouses who are dealing with all of this, and we need to offer care to them as well.
Yeah, the spouses really are the front line of the blunt because they, the first responder will come home and just, they'll spill their guts to their spouse at the most inappropriate time.
Right.
You walk in from a hard shift and your wife, my wife would say, hey, is everything all right? Yeah, I'm fine. You sure? And luckily my spouse is a 20-year nurse, emergency room nurse, and so she can kind of see through the BS when I'm having issues. She'd call me out on it really quick. Yeah. And but a lot of spouses don't have that ability. So I think that they get a lot of stuff dumped on them that they're not prepared for. Even though they don't physically lay eyes on the tragedy that their spouse sees, if he comes home and talks about it, it's traumatic to them. And they, in a bad way, I guess, they kind of their mind is left to paint their own picture, and sometimes it paints a worse picture than what it really was.
Yeah. So
they need help too. They need to be decompressed as well because they've had a lot dumped on them. And a lot of times their spouse will come home and say, hey, I'm going to talk to you about this, but you can't tell nobody.
Right.
Because, there's laws and rules that say you can't come home and talk about what you've seen, but they got to come home and get it off their chest. They trust their spouse. They dump it all on their spouse, and now their spouse can't tell anybody. So you've kind of created this big pod of trauma, and there's nowhere to go with it. And they're dealing with 20 years of that kind of stuff as well.
I think that on both, for both the first responder or the veteran and the spouse, there's also a kind of an identity crisis that happens. This is something we talk about a lot. For the first responder, is police officer, firefighter, medical professional, could be, on the veteran side as well. They begin to identify with what they did, and I think that's why it's on the other side of service that they begin to have problems, right? Because their identity's lost in that, and who am I now, and what I did doesn't propel me forward anymore. The spouses are dealing with the same thing. They have become the spouse of a veteran or the spouse of a first responder. So their whole identity is wrapped up in that as well. So when, as they live and as they operate, as they function with other people, that's how they see themselves. So getting into an environment where they can be told you have an identity separate from your spouse and you have an identity separate from that job, it becomes really, really important on both of those fronts. The identity piece. Who am I? Why do I exist? Why am I here? That's such a big issue. You told your faith story, and I don't know if you can look back and kind of extrapolate, but had you had a faith foundation before you got into a strong faith foundation, a relationship with God that was active before you kind of got into some of these things that you described, how would that have changed how you responded or how you dealt with those things?
Honestly, hindsight's 2020. We say that all the time.
Right.
I wish I had a good faith background back then and realized more that God was with me. I took a lot of stuff on the chin. I took everything at face value as far as why is this happening to me? There was a lot of blaming God. Instead of putting faith in God, I would blame God.
Right.
And I knew enough and had enough faith in God to know he was there, but I didn't have the deep faith to understand that he was there for a reason. I would just blame him and be mad at him and be angry. And like, well, why are you doing this? Why would you do this to these people? Why would you, so I think if I would have had the faith that I have now, I honestly don't feel like I would have even been through Mighty Oaks, because I would have put more on God and turned over more to him instead of try to swallow it all and take it all upon myself.
Yeah.
And that's where it's really helped me now is, there's the bumper sticker, let go and let God, or,
right.
That kind of stuff. And even though that's a corny bumper sticker, there's a lot of truth to that. When you really don't have the answers and you don't know what to do and you're at your wit's end, that's where your road stops and his road starts.
Right.
And you just turn it over to God and say, all right, I'm at the end of my road. You need to tell me where to go. You're controlling the road map, point me in the right direction. But you also have to be smart enough to understand when he gives you direction to follow that direction.
Yeah.
There was a lot of times in my life that I can look back now and say, he wanted me to go right, but I turned left.
Sure.
And if I would have known then what I know now, I would have just continued down the path he wanted me to go. I eventually ended up where he wants me. We're all going to eventually end up where God wants us. But there's a lot easier road to take if you follow the path that he wants you to take.
Absolutely. You talked about jiu-jitsu and, you love jiu-jitsu, you're good at jiu-jitsu, you train, you compete, you do those things. But some people don't care about jiu-jitsu. They would never do jiu-jitsu. How important is the connection to others aspect of healing and moving forward? Not the thing, whether it's jiu-jitsu or something else, but the fact that you're in a community of people that are helping you move forward.
It's so important. It has been the strongest part of my recovery outside of the Bible. Because when things are really going bad, especially military veterans and first responders, you're a part of a team, but you're judged by your individual actions. Mm-hmm. And that is jiu-jitsu in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. I'm good at jiu-jitsu because I have teammates that make me better. I have guys that choke me out on a daily basis. And then the days that I'm having a fantastic day and I'm feeling really good about myself, Bruno tapes his fingers and he puts me in my place. I mean, it's just the way it is. But in the same sense, we're a team and a community, but we're judged in our individual accomplishments when we step on the mat. I have some of the most supportive guys on my team that, jiu-jitsu is full of injuries. You're out for a week or two, you're getting healed up. And when you're out, your teammates check on you, your coach checks on you. Everybody's like, hey man, how you doing? We miss you. Where you at? If I'm not training, Bruno will text me message on the side and say, what'd you do today? What do you mean? Well, did you work out? Did you do this? Did you go to CrossFit? Did you just because you're not at jiu-jitsu, you need to be doing something. And also there's been times in my career that I have been hurt and I shouldn't have competed. But Bruno would say, as a coach, he would say, hey, maybe you need to sit this tournament out. But me personally, with my mental state and the way I gave up on so much in a previous life, I would tell Bruno, hey, I need to compete. I need to be there because I can't quit. And he'll say, you know what? I understand. And he's very understanding to say he doesn't understand me, but he understands my situation. And he doesn't even try to attempt to know what I've been through. But he understands when I tell him, hey, I need to do this, then he figures out a way to let me do it and do it in the smartest possible way. And my teammates are the same way. Yeah. If I'm hurt or injured and can't roll strong, then I've got a group of guys that I can train with that I know I can trust and I know that can help me. So, and all of this is based on jiu-jitsu and me, but I think it's important for anybody recovering from this to develop get a team mentality, get with a group of people, and get with a group of like-minded people who have like-minded goals that are going to hold you accountable for your actions. Yeah. And for me, that's jiu-jitsu. For other guys, it's CrossFit. For other guys, it's wrestling or whatever. But I think that in the jiu-jitsu community, from what I've seen, is everybody has like-minded goals in the respect for each other and the accountability. And that's what I'm used to as a first responder. I spent 20 years of a group of guys counting on me and me counting on them. Right. And I think that's probably where the jiu-jitsu and my walk with Christ have gone hand in hand.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have the opportunity now quite a bit. You were just telling me the other day about speaking to a group of young people, sixth graders through college age, right? So that's quite a spread. But more and more, you're having the opportunity to share your story and encourage people and help people. A lot of one-on-one conversations. What do you tell people who come to you, needing direction and needing hope? You meet someone, whether they're a first responder or wherever they are in their life. There's someone who is without hope. Something bad has happened. They don't know where to go. What do you share with them as the hope? How do you tell them, this is what you need to do to move forward? What is it that you say to that person?
I basically tell them that everything they need to know is in the Bible. Every answer that they need, if they don't understand a problem. And then I also try to tell them to find a mentor that will help them understand that Bible. I knew what the Bible was a long time ago, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to read it. I always spent my entire life trying to pick it apart. I would read somewhere and then somewhere else it would counter, and I wouldn't read the meat in the middle that led up to why it countered. So what I try to tell people is to, first of all, you need to have a good faith in God, and that's going to be the start of your healing process. Then you need to surround yourself with a group of good people that's going to hold you accountable and have a good way, somebody good to talk to. I was fortunate enough when I got out of Mighty Oaks, I knew I needed to find a church, but man, I didn't like church. Church, organized religion at the time was such a joke to me because of the hypocrisy of, they cared about how you dressed and they cared about, well, I met my preacher, Jason Hatch, at the Blaylock Ranch, just on a whim. Mr. Blaylock, I happened to be down there one weekend, and Mr. Blaylock said, hey, I got a young preacher coming out today. Will you go drive him around and show him the ranch? So I went and drove him around and showed him the ranch, and we got to talking, and he was planting a church in Midland, and I was like, well, I'm kind of looking for a new church, and we got to talking. He's a big hunter, and we hit it off. And I found a preacher that I didn't feel like preaches at me, if that makes any sense at all. He's a coach, he's a teacher, and he's an advisor. And I don't feel like, growing up, I grew up in a hardcore Calvary Baptist church where preachers are in suit and ties and you never see them without a Bible in their hand. And, they're you just look at them in a different way. And now I met a guy that wears shorts and flip-flops and a college t-shirt and spreads a good word and he communicates it in a way. So I try to tell the guys, back to your question, I try to tell the guys to find somebody that they can connect with on their level that understands where they're at. Yeah. I'm by no means a professional speaker. My church did a story on me, did a video that's online, and you can get on YouTube and Google Redeemer Dusty, and it'll come up. But that video kind of got out there, and people have asked me to come speak. And if they wanted me to come speak to the Bible, there's no way I could, because I'm still learning the Bible myself. I didn't even really crack a Bible until I was 44 years old. But it's easy to get out there and tell my story. And when that video came out, I got a guy at the jiu-jitsu gym that I roll with, CJ Cyril, or Cyril, I call him Cyril. He looked at that video and he goes, man, this video is going to touch 10,000 people. And I just laughed it off. I was like, no, man, it's just a video. Man, he couldn't have been more right. The things that video has done, I'm completely uncomfortable with public speaking. I'm completely uncomfortable with interviews, yet here I am.
Yeah.
The reason why I do it is because I feel like God's road. This is the path God's chose for me. And it's easy to tell my story because it's not something I have to study or rehearse or go over. It's just my story.
Right.
And if my story can help people, then good thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dusty, I really appreciate the time. We've been trying to do this for a long time. It just hasn't worked out. Every time you come out for a tournament or something, we say we're going to do it and just haven't been able to do it. But appreciate you making time today.
Man, thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate y'all, and I appreciate everything the Mighty Oaks has done for me and my family.
Yes, sir. We'll look forward to the next time, but stay safe out there in Midland. Don't leave your office if you don't have to. Don't breathe the air. just hunker down. Just do your best. Hunker down. Oh, man, Dusty, I appreciate it. For everybody else watching, thank you so much for watching, and look forward to getting together with you next time. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. If you have not hit that notification bell, that's probably the most important thing you can do, let you know when new content comes online. For those that are watching somewhere else or listening somewhere else, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to sharing with you next time. Be safe. I'm always thankful to talk with friends, and Dusty's been a friend for a while now, and I'm so thankful just for him, for his testimony, and that he was willing to share that with us. This is one of the most important aspects of struggle, in my opinion, and getting through that struggle is being willing to turn around and share that with others. And at Mighty Oaks, we have the opportunity to hear so many wonderful stories, but going through something can be difficult. Getting out on the other side of that is great, but it really becomes a redemptive work when you're willing to take what you learned and help others along with that. And Dusty's been doing that. Man, I'm just so thankful for him. My son and I actually got to spend some time with him and his wife. My wife was there as well in Texas this last weekend. It was just awesome to spend time with him, hang out, and talk. But as Dusty talked, you heard the story, incredible story, his story of being at ground zero. Man, some great stories there, and maybe we'll get him on and talk about those at some point. His time in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, also, man, just a crazy, crazy story, of course, and he was there and he shared some of those things as well. But as it relates to the first responder community, and this is something, again, we need to be very, very careful not to overlook. Our men and women who are serving our community every day often are overlooked for the work that they did, and in our current environment here in the United States, sometimes they're not even just overlooked, but they are demonized, they're pushed aside, they're put in a position of being the enemies of the people, and that's just not the case. They're men and women who love their communities and love their families and want to serve, and as they do that every day, they're going out and dealing with stuff that we need them to deal with. They're carrying it home, they're putting it in that backpack, and some are carrying that backpack for many, many years. And eventually, the load that they're carrying will have an impact on them. It will hurt their families, it will damage their relationships, it will cause them to crush under that weight, or they'll figure out how to deal with it and how to take care of it in a healthy way. And again, as you heard Dusty talk, we talked a little bit about the stigma around getting help for those in the first responder community, afraid that it will impact their jobs if they get help. And we need to continue to work to take that stigma away, to work with those who lead these departments and those who can make these decisions to help the men and women that they're serving and that are serving us to get the help that they need. And again, that's one of the great things about organizations like ours, kind of outside of the clinical setting. We offer help, we pay for everything, so their departments don't incur any costs. We'll even cover travel to get them to where they need to go so that they can get that help and avoid the stigma of getting help for what they're dealing with. And I'm thankful that we can do that. We know that their spouses, the family members of those first responders are dealing with a lot of this, and we need to be very quick to recognize that and to offer the help that they need. As Dusty mentioned, having a team around you is so important. I think isolation is probably the biggest thing that absolutely destroys people who are struggling. If you're struggling, find some people that you can trust. It doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu, although it can be. That's a great place, a great outlet. But find a place where there are folks who can come alongside and encourage you and help you and strengthen you and be that team that you need to move forward. And again, as we underline every opportunity we get in the conversation, realize the importance of a faith foundation. Without that faith foundation, without understanding that there is an answer, there is hope, there is a God that cares about us and loves us, we're always going to struggle. And we need to work very diligently to understand what it is to have faith and to establish that faith foundation. There is always hope. What a great message for right now. Right now, in the middle of what's absolutely causing panic and chaos in not only our country, but our world. I was going to say our country, but our world. People around the world in this place of hopelessness and desperation because of what's happening. We're in a place right now, a moment in time where we're told we're experiencing a global pandemic, and no one really knows what that word means, but we're all scared of it. There's stuff happening we don't understand. We don't know how long it's going to last. Understand, there is always hope. There's always more outside of this. And we saw this even in Dusty's story, understanding there's something else. There is a place to find hope. I'm so thankful for this conversation. I hope that you are as well. And I trust that this was an encouragement to you. Again, if you have not yet, go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell. We'd love to make sure you are aware when new content comes online designed to help you. And we'll continue to push that out to you. For those of you that are listening elsewhere, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.